And we're live with me
Hey.
and Jeff's ceiling.
Jeff what?
Jeff's ceiling.
Oh, Jeff Sealing, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
It's a great ceiling. It's fascinating.
Yep. What we have today, you know what? I got slightly confused. I was going to start talking about Blake 7, but this is Homicide. So take it away, Jeff.
Homicide episode 2, A Ghost of a Chance. So, very brief summary on the case introduced in the first episode. The girl, Adina Watson. A lot of this episode has to do with that case.
Yeah.
It's as Tim Bayliss's first case as the primary detective, but everybody else in the squad is involved in it because it's what they refer to as a red ball, meaning a case that gets a lot of media attention and attention by the big bosses and all that. So several characters express some skepticism in whether Bayliss can handle the case. And they sort of introduce the concept of media cooperation or lack thereof with the police department and as well as the boss.
There seems to be like a police chief, like a superior to G, who looks rather young.
Yep. Yeah.
So what's the deal with that? Is that explained in later episodes? Why he's so young?
I'll let you discover those things for them as we go.
Okay, but is there a reason for it?
There's definitely plenty of times where the politics of how the bosses get picked it comes into play in later episodes. But,
right. I see.
In this episode, there are a few other sort of side cases. Lewis and Cressetti, they don't mention the Calpurnia Church case, but they do talk some more about the Lincoln assassination.
Yeah.
And as well as other random topics. Bolander is trying to date the medical examiner, but he also has some arguments with her about a particular case that he and Munch get, where an old lady wants her husband dead and may or may not have killed him. But the first time when they get there, he's not actually dead yet. And then we had Howard and Felton trying to get more evidence on a guy that they already had arrested. And Howard is visited in a dream by the victim of the homicide. And so she back and forth with Felton about that for a while.
Yeah, she goes a little bit NF for about 5 minutes.
Right.
And I found out which Baldwin, looking at the credits, Daniel Baldwin, I think.
Yeah. So we get some more insight into the way the characters think and the way they approach things, because one of the interesting dynamics is you'll have something that I think is present in a lot of different professions. Sports is one that I can think of, that I know of, where there can be a lot of internal conflict on a sports team, for instance, where, there might be some infighting or some conflicts going on. But when the media or the outside world asks about it, everybody will be like, oh, no, everything's fine, and they'll stand up for each other because it's sort of like there's sort of the brotherhood kind of concept that, whatever problems we've got going on, that's between us and we deal with it ourselves. And, as far as anybody else is concerned, we stay on the same page. And you'll see that, throughout the show as we go in terms of the police department, is that even if there may be, questioning of detectives and what they're doing behind the scenes, there's what you see in G, for instance, the boss, with talking with his bosses, is that even though he may have plenty of his own doubts and skepticisms about whether Bayliss can handle the case, to the bosses and to the media, he presents it as if Bayliss is up for the job because he feels it's important to stand up for his detectives and also to not undercut their confidence and ability to handle things. So
Yeah,
he feels that he can solve the case with help from the other detectives rather than taking him off the case as the primary detective.
And also with the characterization of him as in the STJ, it's almost as if it's called the role function, and it's where when the STJs get older, they sort of show, and you did see that sort of caring side. And I like the line when he said, I wrote down the line, follow the book, follow your gut.
Mm-hmm.
And yep.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because some characters in that position might have said something like, don't go by the book. But G says follow the book, but then he says follow your gut. So in a sense it sounds like a mixed message, but with G's mind it's consistent.
Yeah, and that's what made me think of the role function of where like for instance, like you can do the NE stuff when you get to if you turn your mind to it, you can do it. And so usually it's when you get tired you can do all that stuff. Anyway, we didn't talk too much about that, but yeah, but I just think that was a bit. It was you get that bit that almost an ESFJ, but just with more emotion because he's older. That I quite like, rather than certain times they have the police chief where he's more of a caricature.
Well, what I like about Homicide is that they weren't afraid to show different sides to the characters.
Yep.
And not just have them be stock characters. There's very few over the course of the series, very few characters you can just say where that character just fills the role of, stock, whatever. There's a few, when they just need stupid criminal acts or whatever, So there's a few like that, but for the most part, even the guest characters.
Do you want to say a bit, because
well-rounded.
Because people are starting to follow this. Hopefully, they start following this on our channel. Do you want to say like how it got started and how much connection to real life it has? I think you said it was based on a book about a real police in Baltimore.
Right. It's a book called Homicide: A Year on the Killing Streets, because David Simon, the author, spent a year having access to the homicide unit in Baltimore. So this show is based on his book, and a lot of the cases from the first couple of seasons, come pretty much straight out of the book. And interestingly, David Simon would later join the show as a writer, as a member of the writing staff. So he would, at first he was sort of like a consultant, but later on when he was finished with other things he was working on, he joined as a full-time writer. So later on there will be stories that, while they may not be directly out of his book, they have his insight, based on what he learned as being actually spending time in the department. So he was obviously a valuable resource as a consultant and as a writer.
Do you think he might have planned it?
Planned what exactly?
Well, he might
later as a writer.
And then not so much that is like, oh, if I write this book, maybe there could be a. I mean, was he also interested in TV writing? Maybe he thought there might be a. Oh. If I do this book, maybe there could be a TV series in it.
I can't remember off the top of my head if he had done TV writing before. I know he worked for a newspaper for at least a period of time. I don't remember if it was the Baltimore Sun or not, but it might have been. but I can't remember if he had actually done TV writing before he wrote the Homicide. But I know he did do some other than Homicide. And in fact, basically, some people watching this may be familiar with the show The Wire, that came later. The Wire was basically created by the same creative team that did Homicide. They also did a show called Oz about prison. So that production team of Tom Fontana and
Barry Levinson,
and I don't blankly that guy's name, and the other writers, Yoshimura and Simon.
Oh,
and
in this
one other one I'm not thinking of.
In this episode, anyway. I saw a computer.
Yeah, they had computers. Not quite the computers of today.
No. In fact, that's the problem. In fact, they're too similar to the ones of today. Technology's not moved ahead enough. Like if you compare like 20 years before and like 10 years before.
Well, I mean, the big thing to me, the big kind of cutoff in terms of modern versus stuff that people look back and think of as old now is just, the difference between now and a show like Homicide is you don't have all the cell phones and portable devices.
Oh, yeah.
Even though computers existed, they were stationary machines. Computer is in that room or that office. It's not anywhere else. And if you want to move it somewhere, it's an undertaking because you got to unplug everything and then pick it up and probably get some help moving it somewhere. Not like today where there's so many handheld portable stuff. Although I think there were obviously some portable things at that point but a lot of it was like considered kids' toys. There was things like little LCD football games and things like that, and then of course the Nintendo Game Boy came out, which I'm not sure that was the first portable game system, but it was definitely one of the first ones.
I had it's like a data bank thing.
Yeah, my older brother has always been the one in my family that was kind of on the cutting edge of technology, but because he couldn't always have the money to buy the new technology, he would still use quite a bit of old technology, and was very good at making do with what he had when he didn't have the newest stuff available. But of course, he always wanted it. He wanted to have.
Yeah. Sometimes you get that.
Watches came out that had like new functions to them and things like that.
Like a Casio watch, where it's got like calculator, stopwatch, world time, data bank where you can store like 50 phone numbers in. Although INTPs at the time really don't have 50 phone numbers.
Yeah, no, he didn't have 50 phone numbers, but yeah, I mean, he would set alarms for things and stuff like that. The fact that you could set multiple alarms, that was a new thing at those days.
Oh yeah, I did it for television programs.
Yeah.
But you could only have a message that was like 16 characters, because the memory was like so small, like 4K.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
so back to Homicide.
Yeah, I liked the stuff with Bolander and about the fact that he doesn't pick up on the little signs, and they established that with the when it's talking about the fact that she doesn't lock the door. And then that second thing where he doesn't pick up that she's receptive.
Yeah, so that's a case where, even though Bolander's the sensing type of the two, Munch has a better intuition for what vibes people are giving off. Whereas Bolander is, he might be able to visually describe something more accurately than Munch, but he doesn't pick up the signals as well.
Maybe he's just insecure and he just can't believe what he's actually seeing.
Well, that's part of it too.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of factors that go into it, but
yeah.
As far as he's naturally inclined to pay less attention to those things.
Yeah.
Than Munch is, because Munch has that kind of viewpoint of, seeing intimations and messages, picking up things, even sometimes when they're not intentional from people, but even when they are.
I mean, just thinking of ENTP, just a little sidetrack. There was this ENTP in the chat, in a chat, like posting comments, and it was one of these people that compliments himself by talking about his type.
Mm-hmm.
Like where they go, as an ENTP, we can see both sides of every issue. And it's like, oh no. And I actually said, and what I did is I posted, I love your ENTP character. It's fantastic. Your spoof ENTP character. Do you also do the INFJ and their superpowers, like Ryan Moore? So I just assume, just make them, give them the impression that, oh yeah, fantastic. You're doing an exaggerated ENTP here, guy. Because that was...
Yeah, well, I've encountered, as you know, I've had some encounters with ENTJs where I could have said the same thing, because they seem like sort of parodies of themselves.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, you really don't see how much of a jackass you come off as, do you?
Yeah. Just thing
but getting back to the episode,
yeah,
like I watched it a second time, and it's one of those shows where it's like I can rewatch it and I can pick up things that I didn't get in the previous times, because there's so much detail and layers to things, and the dynamics of the investigation, like the little bit where Munch and Bolander argued about whether or not Adina Watson was killed where she was left, or whether she was killed somewhere else and brought there. And Munch argues that she was killed there. Bolander says no, somewhere else. And then when they get into the group discussion, Munch is the one that speaks up and says she was obviously killed somewhere else and brought there. That's a given. So he seizes that thing that he argued against and puts it out there like, well, this is obvious. And there's those little touches that I think are great, when you have those lines and the facial expressions, like the part near the end where Bayliss, for the first time with the other, kind of asserts his authority as the primary detective, because he tells, when Pimbleton says it's a waste of my time, and he says maybe so, but I'm the primary, and Pimbleton gives him the smirk, and Lewis and Cressetti standing there kind of have little smiles on their faces too, like, maybe this kid's got some guts after all.
Yeah, I felt the way that was played by the actor, it wasn't bad acting, but I thought the choice was, and of course we have to think about the technology at the time, because I remember hearing a difference between screen acting on the big screen and then acting on television. And at the time, in 1992, the televisions weren't that big, and also in America they had 5:25 lines. And in the UK they had 6:25 lines, so the picture would have been sharper. And I was watching it on a 27-inch screen on the film version, so I was watching it sharper than Americans were watching it at the time. And I thought that the way the actor playing Bayliss, I thought he, in about the first 10 minutes, I think he overplayed how green he was, but only it wasn't bad acting. It was just the choice of how much he was over, because he looked really out of his depth.
Yeah, I think what you see in the early episodes of Bayliss is that he has that kind of frenetic response where, like, if he keys in on something where he knows a bunch of facts about something, he'll rattle them off in rapid succession.
Mm.
But when he's not doing that, he kind of looks and sounds lost. And I think, I mean, to me, like I said in the first video about the first episode, that the concept of Bayliss's character was kind of, he's sort of the audience's window into the department. And it's sort
Yeah.
of like, yeah, the average viewer, doesn't have even the experience that Bayliss has, but it's still kind of the idea of, what if you were thrust into this situation? How would you react? How would you figure these things out? Or not even just the actual police work, but just in terms of the dynamic of the people around you, and handling the egos and the personalities, and the and earning the respect of your bosses, the people you're working with, and still doing your job. All that stuff is something that comes up in most workplaces, not just the police department. It may not be obviously trying to solve a murder case, but there's something early in a job where you're kind of faced with something similar, in a lot of jobs. So I think that was kind of the intention with Bayliss, is that he's in those awkward, uncomfortable situations and has to kind of find his way without a lot of support. I mean, he has people sort of giving him, a few words of encouragement, but he's basically, is like, all right, you're a big boy now. You gotta do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. I mean,
And so you see in that early time, as he kind of struggles to find himself in that position. But he's obviously, like I said, in certain areas he's obviously very skilled and confident about certain things, but it's easy to throw him off in a lot of ways.
well, that's you usually see that where you have, like, with someone who is younger, and they've been academically, they know the book backwards, but it's then these things outside of the book where they have to be more adaptable. So they played that, but yeah, I mean, it's not so much the acting got better; the choices got better after like the first 5 or 10 minutes. I thought, okay, now that's good, and it's not distracting. And then I thought when Howard got upset, there were 1 or 2 notes that I thought could have been acted better, but everybody else was good. But nothing bad. Just because like the first episode, I think everyone was good, but I was watching it smaller.
And again, I'm not really sure what the size of the screen has to do with it, but I'd say that the one difference between the first and second episodes is this different director. So there obviously are going to be some subtle things that will come off differently with somebody.
Yes, yeah. Some directors aren't the best with actors and actresses.
And it's a long time, obviously, before we get there. But in the 6th season, on the 6th season DVD, there's actually a documentary about the show, about the production of one particular episode that was a very critically acclaimed episode. And there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff about how directors had been chosen sometimes, and which ones that they wanted back, which ones they didn't, and the concerns they had about. And usually they said when they brought in directors that were used to doing movies, that they had the most conflicts with those directors, because they had a harder time accepting budget limitations, time limitations, space limitations. Like, there was constant, like, battling about, well, we can't make this that big, or we can't make it that, you had to sort of keep on Yoshimura, who was one of the writers and also production coordinator, maybe, I can't remember what all his titles were, but he sort of acted as the liaison often between the producers and the directors, and he was one having to be like, you know, look, this is the way we have to do this.
Mm.
You know, we're not trying to limit your creativity. We're just saying, here's the bottom line facts of how this has got to be. And
I mean, I would rather direct a film than on TV, because I'm the sort of person that I could like plan it ruthlessly for a film, like, and plan things for going wrong and all that. But the most challenging directing gig, in my opinion, try and directing Doctor Who, where you're effectively doing a movie on a TV budget in hardly any time.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I would say that has probably changed a lot with the current Doctor Who versus the classic Doctor Who.
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's a much bigger budget, and in general, the style of the new show is to make things big like a movie rather than, you know, smaller scale of most of.
oh yeah, yeah. Whenever I talk about Doctor Who, I mean proper Doctor
Um, but yeah, I remember there was something on that documentary about the one Homicide episode. The episode took place almost entirely in subway underground,
Mm.
and you know they filmed it in the real, you know, underground in Baltimore, and there was a particular like scene where it was something like they originally said, okay, we've got, you know, 4 or 5 days to, you know, kind of perfect these scenes and that they're going to be here in this place. And then it was like right before they were about to begin recording, they said, oh, turns out we have 1 day.
Oh,
So it was like, you know, basically, okay, we're going to stay here for as many hours as they let us be here in order to get this right. And I can't remember exactly what it was. There was something where they said that the director was unhappy with it. They, you know, everybody was like almost at each other's throats. It was like the, you know, 14 hours into the thing, and everybody was stressed out. But there was somebody on the staff that basically suggested one change or like one thing they could do that would work. That was way different from the original script, I guess, and what the director wanted, which was too ambitious, whatever. And it was like that one little bitty suggestion saved them. Like one, they did it that way, and then they did it like one take basically, and they're like, that was perfect. That's what we're gonna use. So they cover like not only the frustrations of like when you have those situations where you're limited by, you know, budgets and space and all those things, but they also have like the times where, you know, they illustrate where somebody's able to figure something out in an instant, you know, that fixes something or makes it work. So it's a kind of fascinating window into television production.
was it the first thing that Barry Levinson did?
No.
Because because if it were me, like, I would even have it where I would have those directors that I trusted. I would have to put, because that would be such an important thing. Because you know it's television, you've got to know that they can do it.
Now it may have been Homicide may have been the first thing he did for television. I can't remember actually if he had directed, because I know he was mostly known as a film director at the time the show started. And Ned Beatty was known mostly as a film actor. That's why he's the one guy that gets the, you know, and Ned Beatty as Bolander credit because he was the most well known of the actors at the time.
Right, that's why he gets that special credit. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of one of those things that they stick in there to try to get people's attention. Like, hey, you might know this guy, even if you don't know the rest of the cast. And Andre Braugher, who played Pimbleton, was kind of like the breakout actor of the show, the one where everybody took notice of him because he was so good as Pimbleton, and everybody was like, wow.
Oh yeah.
And Richard Belzer, of course, wasn't an actor at all. He was a stand-up comedian, so he was the one with the least amount of experience in the cast. And in fact, the producers said that when Barry Levinson first saw his audition, he was like, "Oh, that guy's terrible." But somebody, and I can't remember if actually it was Levinson himself or it was Fontana or something, but somebody was like, I really think he's perfect for this part. So they
Yes, that's
like
the thing.
they wouldn't let they were like, no, I mean, just give him another chance to do it again. Give him, send him off with a script, have him study it, come back, do it again. And so one of them, and I can't, it's been a while since I saw these documentaries and stuff, but one of them said like he came back, he did it again, and I was like, that was even worse than the first time. So finally, the one guy was just like, okay, just stop acting, just be yourself, just play yourself.
Yeah,
Was basically what they
yeah.
told him. And
And
so,
also with somebody like that, you would say, like, right, we know what kind of storylines we're not going to do for this kind of actor. We're not going to do super emotional storylines.
yeah, but you can definitely see he's definitely one as an actor that gets better as the show goes on, and you can see his progression in that way. And the other thing is, it's like you can tell when he has those rare moments where there's a line that it's like you can tell that either the director or the producer said, okay, this line in the script, you have to say this whether or not it sounds natural to you or not. You can tell the difference when he says those lines because he sounds more robotic saying those lines, and then everything else he sounds much more natural. So in
It,
the
it's
first
still, but
episode,
it's still
in the
better
first
than the. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
in the first episode, there was only really one line that he sounds that way about, and that was the very first line when he introduces himself to the one stupid guy that's in the hospital, and he says, "Is this the guy?" Like I don't know how many takes they did, but it doesn't sound natural. But everything else from there pretty much does.
Yeah, because he has to. Because he's probably not playing the fact that of him not knowing the. Yeah, that's why. Yeah, is this the guy? Yeah, because he has to. Yeah, I can
Yeah, because he's
understand
not
why
actually
that wouldn't.
talking to anybody. That's part of the problem is he comes
Yeah,
in, he's not directing that line to anyone in particular. It sounds like you don't see anybody he's directly talking to. So that seems like one of those things that they probably reshot several times and finally just said, okay, we'll just do it this way and we'll just live with it. But there really aren't, over the course of the series, there really aren't that many times that there's things like that. Most of the time, regardless of what behind the scenes struggles may have gone on in particular situations, it comes off really. I mean, I very rarely had any kind of feeling where I looked at the actors as actors. I mean, they were all very believable as their characters, so
mm.
I was taken into their world very easily.
With these things, I mean, when you, I mean, I would imagine as a director going on a show like that, it'd be very difficult to direct the actors and actresses because, right, from their point of view, well, you're going to be gone next week. You're not going to change the performances. It's not like it's a movie and you're the director and you choose who's going to be in it, and you have much more power over the performances. Whereas,
Yeah, and that's why the selection of, like you said, directors that they could trust and worked well with them, was so important. So that's another thing in any show that, like, that the kind of has to be feeled out at the beginning. And there are some shows that they pretty much have one director because that's just what works.
mm,
Seinfeld was on for 9 years, and they basically had two directors over the course of the entire show. I mean, there were a couple others they were credited with directing, but there was pretty much one main director for the first like 4 years or whatever it was, and then another one for the last five, and that was
well,
it.
and one of the things I remembered about Seinfeld is, I think Jeffrey Hirschfield was the casting director. Fantastic casting.
Hmm.
Nearly all the guest people were good. In
Yeah, and I feel that way about Homicide too. There's so many good.
oh yeah, even the little girl crying was pretty believable near the
Yeah,
start.
I was about to say even small parts, and they got Matthew Coles, who was a great, fantastic actor, to play the one suspect that Pimbleton has in the box. That's kind of like he's drugged up or drunk or
Yeah,
whatever.
he was pretty good, pretty
Yeah,
convincing. Yeah.
he's probably best known as uh, Billy Clyde Tuggle, the pimp from All My Children. So he was very don't even know what to call that. I'm sure there's some name for that style, but he's like a pimp, but he has this like sophisticated style to his
Posh
presentation.
pimp.
But yet he's like southern at the same time. So he's like this sort of rednecky but wannabe sophisticated guy who's got this
Right.
persona. The great, and I don't know how much of that was in the script and how much was sort of created by him as an actor, but he did a great job of, in the parts that he played, finding the
But,
voice they say for his characters.
right. So, Jeff, this is a double header recording tonight. So,
It is.
yep, because we've got the Blake 7 one to do.
Oh well, I haven't watched that yet, so
Oh, I thought you'd watched it.
no, I'm gonna have to put that off till tomorrow.
Oh, right, okay. I thought you'd watched it. Okay.
No.
Okay. Right.
No, I didn't think it was going to be this late when we started this one, so I was not gonna. I was, wanted to be ready to go when you were ready.
Yeah, I got a little bit delayed I was doing a test, a typology test.
So
A very good one.
Did you have any more thoughts on this homicide episode?
I liked the setting of the funeral.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, there's sometimes the instances 2 or 3 dead bodies, I could see them breathing. Where in just a little thing from the doctor, hold your breath.
Where did you say?
I think I saw some breathing on people who were supposed to be dead.
But I mean, who did they show? Like the girl?
I think maybe at the beginning, and then there was a little bit of movement. But I may have been imagining it. That's something I'll watch out for.
I was trying to think what dead bodies they actually showed in that episode, and I could only think of Adina because even though they have the old man dead, but they don't really show.
Yeah, but he ain't dead at that point.
Yeah, you can only see like his legs on the stairs or whatever. So as far as like really showing the bodies, it was only Adina, I think.
I think it was Adina when they showed an angle where she had like blood around her, and you could sort of see some movement here, but it's all very slight. And it wouldn't.
At the very beginning when Bayliss is like moving around her body, trying to find.
Yeah, there's a little. But again, that's the sort of thing. It wouldn't have shown up on the TV at the time.
Yeah, well, it's not, and also, I mean, you can kind of account for that with the circumstances. I mean, it was supposed to be like rain and wind and stuff, so it could have just been like, the elements.
Yeah, it wasn't like. There's one point in Blake 7 where sometimes you get that in Blake 7, where it's like it's with some people, and it's like when you're playing dead, don't breathe, hold your breath.
I actually admire actors that have had to play dead bodies for what seems like a real long extended shot because most of the time they won't do that because of that very thing, so there'll be a lot of cuts. They'll only show it for a few seconds, things like that. And so, but some people are really just talented at being able to hold their breath and stay really still. I remember I was in a play once in a community theater show where it was The Unexpected Guest. I don't know if you ever saw that one. It's Agatha Christie, but the beginning, the guy who played the dead guy had to be still for the entire opening scene, so it's not not easy to do. And of course, once you have other people in the room interacting, then there's at least the thing where the audience, their attention is going to be on the other characters. So it's not quite as likely they're going to see you move or something like that. But he did a really good job because he's in the scene, in the light the whole time, and has to be still enough that there's no kind of movement that's enough that anybody's going to notice. Even if they're not directly looking at him. So he did a pretty good job with that. Better than I could do, I'm pretty sure.
I like the first episode a little more than the second episode. But I could see the threads being picked up in the second one.
Obviously, the first episode, most TV shows are shot, at least in America, as pilots. They're trying to pitch to the network, so there's a lot of kind of let us introduce the characters kind of stuff in them. And so in the first episode, you had kind of more introductory things. In the second episode, obviously there's less of that. There's more of the meat of the plot, but you still get some more insights into the characters.
Plus, when I watched it, I was quite tired. So even though I still liked it, even though I was tired, so I actually get more critical when I'm tired. So, and it was still okay. It was still quite good.
Well, that's good.
When I get,
yeah, I mean, I think I can be critical of Homicide episodes, but it's a little bit tough because I just love the show so much, and to me, it's like in the entire 7 seasons, there's not a single episode that I'm like, that was a bad episode. There are certain plots that I'm not particularly fond of, and scenes I might not like that much. Characters that went in directions I might not have particularly liked. There's things that I can pick on, but in terms of as a television show, as an entertainment, as a performance, I mean, it's just a damn good show. So it's it's especially in that first season. I just, I sit there in awe of it. I'm just like, man, this is still so good today. It holds up, even with things like, technological advances and all that sort of stuff. It's just really grabs you from the beginning.
Yeah, the characterization and the acting is really good. In terms of folks, a series where just the difference in quality between episodes, Star Trek Voyager, 26 episode season, you would have 2 or 3 comedy episodes a year, which were gold. They were really good. And the other episodes, you could have half the episodes were just awful. Awful. I
see a lot of that show, but I will go into a long thing about it, but I did watch Deep Space Nine for a while, and what I noticed with that show is they made the first episode too good. I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but it was the first one was so good that everything else after that paled in comparison. It seemed boring because it was like you had this amazing beginning and then it just kind of petered out after that. And yeah, they still made some good episodes. They had very good actors on that show too. And it wasn't like it was a terrible show.
Well, some of them.
But it was like I kept waiting for that same amazing that was in the first one, and just nothing came close. It was just so normal in comparison.
I like Garak, the gay Cardassian. I mean, it was obvious. I mean, well, the way he was played, he was definitely played as gay.
But yeah, that's still one of those that I think is the biggest example of a show that just like it peaked at the beginning of it, and it was never as good as the beginning. So
yeah, that was a show that was a bit weird. Deep Space Nine. I didn't really. I mean, also what happened was they were on at the same time as Babylon 5, and they started to nick an art plot. And what happened was, I'll just tell the audience a little thing what happened. J. Michael Straczynski pitched Babylon 5 to Paramount, and he gave them a list of episodes that he would do. And then some elements of those episodes turned up in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And he was very annoyed about that. In fact, one of the things that happened was that in J. Michael Straczynski's script, he had a polymorph in it, a changeling. And so, yeah. I know we're going a little bit off the reservation here. So, you want to come back, Jeff? Right. Okay, well, I will try and do some filling. Yeah. Yeah, all the small parts in that episode were well acted. Yeah, and the atmosphere of the way it was directed in terms of the rookie, there being so much activity around him being in the center of this storm, where he can't even have a desk.
Yep. Yeah, I thought all that was so cool. Like, it's like I said, most of the early stuff, was taken almost directly out of the book. So I mean, it was very realistic in terms of, I mean, even that case that the rookie detective.
Have you read the book?
I have not. It was one that, at the time when I was most interested in getting it, it didn't seem to be available anywhere.
Well, now
I think since then, it'll pop up like on Amazon. It's like used. Somebody has it, for pretty cheap.
Yeah.
I've never gotten it.
But, I think now's the time. Now's the time, Jeff, because then you could tell the audience about bits. Oh, this bit's like this and this and this.
Well, I might.
Extra bits.
I'm not much of a book reader, so.
I'm a book buyer. I'm more of a book buyer than a book reader.
I'm even less of a book buyer. Yeah, I every once in a while.
Mind you, folks, Jeff has. Have you read pretty much? I know you've read Please Understand Me. You've read Please Understand Me 2. You've read Brains and Careers. You've read Personology.
Uh-huh.
Have you read Portraits of Temperament?
No.
What about Presidential Temperament, if it's called that?
I have not read that, but I have read a bunch of excerpts from it because they're on Kersey's website. He has and from time to time had posted blog posts that had some extended parts of it because there were reviews of a lot of the presidents. So profiles, of presidents.
Oh, and one thing that Jeff showed me is the Kersey website. They actually produce a magazine, a really good magazine, for free.
Yep.
It's like, what? I mean, Jeff showed me it and I thought, what, has he got a subscription and he's showing me something that's knockoff? I mean, no, it's free.
Yeah, and in fact, they also do the newsletter thing where if you register on the site, that you tell them what your temperament is, then they send you the newsletter for your temperament.
It's, I've got to say, it's an IMDB thing, not the best business logic.
What?
The INTP is not the best business logic because they don't really care about not the best.
Oh, you just mean because they're not charging for the magazine?
Yeah, and just other things. Just because it's not as interesting in trying to squeeze as much money out as possible.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's logic. I'd just say it's more like just different priorities.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. I mean, I mean, his priorities. He's pretty much said this. His priority is getting his father's book out. Can we talk about that? Dark Escape. That's it. Eventually, it will come out.
Yeah, I hope it does. They've done a lot of bits of it that were posted in various things, but that would be a book I probably would acquire should it be released.
Oh, one thing, Jeff, you were reading though. You did start reading Psychological Types, didn't you?
Yeah, I read as much as was in that scribd or whatever they call it, download of it.
Oh, you did have all of it?
It didn't, but it had quite a bit.
Oh, right. Because I think the whole thing should be, the whole PDF should be available. I mean, the two chapters worth reading are, it's basically just chapter 10, which is the chapter that's worth reading.
I've read that before because someone has posted that in its entirety to multiple forums. So yeah, after reading what I did read of Psychological Types, it didn't really make me go, oh, I've got to read the rest of this, because it's pretty boring. But at least I can say to the people that are like, well, if you read Psychological Types, then you would understand on a deeper level Jungian processes, and then you wouldn't use that lame stereotype stuff from Kersey. I can say, actually, I have read a significant amount of it, and found it to be much lamer than anything.
Yeah, I mean, talking about stereotypes, the extroverted feeling type is a big stereotype, and the introverted feeling type is a big stereotype, where it's almost describing the hysterical woman who can't express herself.
Like I said, I'm planning on doing at least one video, if not multiple ones, about some of the problems with the young theists and all that. But anyway,
speaking of that, in a recent video, I did say, praise be to Carl Jung, and he actually meant it. So maybe I'm a little bit of a young theist.
Well, that's the thing, is I can get along with young theists as long as they're not militant.
Yes, that's the problem.
I have problems with the militant young theists, but
yes,
not the peaceful ones. So if we build the wall, I wouldn't keep out all of them. Just the bad ones.
Right. Before we digress too much onto anything else to say about the episode. No, yeah, I mean, yeah, very natural performance by, was it the guy playing Bolander? You actually forget his acting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what one of the greatness of that show is. A lot of times that's the case. It just doesn't. I'm not sitting there critiquing acting. I'm just enjoying how good it is.
Yeah, that's the thing. When it's really good, you can get into when the acting's really good and the characterization's really good, and there are no plot holes, then you can really get into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're the hardcore Homicide fans. Of course, at the time that show was on, the internet was not what it is today. But there were still some dedicated groups like Usenet, the Alt TV Homicide group. So there was some discussion, and the general consensus of most of the fans on there was that in the last couple of seasons that the quality went down some. And I sort of had retroactively bought into that. I sort of, from my own memories, had said, oh, well, I remember that I had somewhat lost interest towards the end. And so I kind of figured, okay, well, it probably did. But when I rewatched it last year with Morgan, I was actually like, you know what? It really
doesn't have some big dip in quality. You know,
just a little one.
Yeah, a little bit, but it's more. There's certain choices that were kind of forced upon them by the network that obviously I think it would have been better if that hadn't happened. But in terms of the individual episodes, like I said, I still don't think there was a bad episode of Homicide. I still think every episode, you know, at the end of it, I'm like, I could still look at that and say, well, it was a good episode. You know, they produced. It's kind of similar to one book that I did read was, because it's pretty short, called American Top 40 Countdown of the Century by Rob Durkee, and it's, you know, all about sort of the creation of American Top 40 and you know, the history of it and stuff like that. And they cover the period of time when Shadoe Stevens was the host after Casey Kasem left ABC Radio to start a different show on another network. And a lot of the stuff on his time there focuses on problems behind the scenes and Shadoe being unhappy with what he was repeatedly told to do. He was told to keep changing the way he was doing it. He had his stuff he would do was edited out. He had jokes he did that were edited out. Like there was a lot of conflict between him and the powers that be over the creative side, you know, of the show. But when I listen to it, I can say, okay, there were certain things that I might have liked better during his early time on the show, but I still love the episodes, the shows he did later on. Even if he was unhappy doing it, I'm like, they still produced a hell of a show. His performance still sounds great. Everything, you know, they still, in what they had available, made it great. And I feel the same way about Homicide, is that that you can find the flaws and limitations, but then I can look at it and say they still did a great job doing as best they could with what they had to do.
Is there a name for Homicide fans? You know, like there is for Doctor Who, there's Whovians, and Star Trek, there's Trekkies.
I may have heard something like that over the years. I don't remember. There were certain little recurring things from the news group that got repeated, but I don't remember. Somebody may have called them like Lotzians or something like that, because the subtitle "Life on the Street" was abbreviated as LOTS, so Lots.
Right.
So one thing.
Not Homiciders.
Yeah, that I'd never heard anybody say that, but one thing that was a recurring thing, which I won't spoil because it's an upcoming episode, but there's a reason why people in that group would say, you know, there's if you know the phrase "give you my 2 cents worth,"
yeah.
On that group they would say "give you my 11 cents worth," and there's a reason why they say that, but you'll that'll be coming up in a couple seasons, I think. I can't remember exactly when that episode is, but anyway.
The only thing I would critique about it is maybe a slightly different name for it.
Well, of course, they originally were just going to call it Homicide, but then the network said that sounds too bad. You got to have something to, you know, some kind of subtitle or something. And then, of course, the book was called A Year on the Killing Streets. Well, they didn't want to call it a year on something because people would think it was only going to last a year.
Yeah.
But they also didn't want the word killing in it. The network didn't. So they compromised and called it Life on the Street, even though it really wasn't about life. But in a way, it sort of is. So it ended up sort of fitting anyway. But
yeah. But yeah, I mean, this is just little. Actually, they ain't even niggles. He's just trying to find something to say.
Well, I mean, we can wrap it up if you don't have anything else.
Yeah,
to say about that episode.
I don't think
We
so.
can. We can.
And I think what I'll do in future is I'll watch it at an earlier point when I'm not as tired.
Yeah, that's
but
a good idea.
I still didn't get cranky.
Because that way, of course, you can take advantage of, being able to watch it earlier when I'm at work, and then, when I'm home, we could talk about it and stuff.
So tomorrow we have, and perhaps it would be better to do to alternate one a day. It depends how it is.
Yeah.
It might be better. It might be better to alternate that way.
That's fine with me.
Right, because then we can spend more time on each one. I think you'll like the next. The next one. Oh yeah, some people apparently a lot of at the time, a lot of Star Wars fans liked Blake 7 because of the
Blake
similar
7,
premise.
Did it start before or after Star Wars came out?
Well, what it was is, well, the actual copyright on the scripts, well, Terry Nation. I've been wondering. You see, the actual copyright that Terry Nation has, Blake 7 has an apostrophe in it. When they did the TV series, there's no apostrophe in it. And I was wondering, was that because of copyright? Because that was like, because it's like, you just have like Blake 7, no apostrophe in it.
Okay, but I was asking about when.
Oh, when? Okay. It came out, it was broadcast in about February 1978. But all the prep work, there wasn't enough time for them to go, oh, let's rip off Star Wars.
Okay, so it was being written and conceived at the same time that Star Wars was being filmed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the scripts were, and by then, and during Blake 7, Terry Nation moved to America, and he worked on American TV series. Did you know about that, Jeff?
Yeah, I have vague notions of that. I read over the course of the time when I was, really getting into Doctor Who again in 06, 07, and there, I read a ton of stuff about, behind the scenes Doctor Who things and people that worked on it. And of course, I also watched the DVDs that had like the information text that, that gave me more information too about stuff. The most recent one of those I watched was the Ice Warriors. And they had a lot of biographical information about the actors in that story.
Right, here we go. I'll just say for the audience, even though it's not really relevant. Since 1979, Terry Nation has worked as writer. Oh, right. When this was written, I think Terry Nation was still alive. This book. Since 1979, Terry has worked as a writer-producer for Columbia Pictures and 20th Century Fox, and now lives permanently in Los Angeles. Whilst living in the US, he has written for and produced episodes of the series MacGyver, A Fine Romance. So you could see how he was getting better and better as a writer. And I can actually say that if Terry Nation hadn't have left Blake 7 halfway through, and then Chris Boucher took over after Terry Nation left, it is actually true that the Daleks would have turned up in Blake 7. That's what Terry Nation wanted.
All right.
Yep, that is actually true.
It's probably, I can say this having seen a grand total of one episode of Blake 7, but it just sounds like it's probably a good thing that they didn't.
Yes, because the totally different tones. It would have been ridiculous.
Yeah, it sounds like it would have been a somewhat awkward crossover. But.
Yes, quite right.
Whereas the Homicide and Law and Order crossovers seem to work pretty well, even though Law and Order's presentation is somewhat different. The characters seem to blend pretty well.
Right.
And of course, probably some of that's due to having good actors that can do that. But Morgan, of course, as we were watching it, he still, and I basically agree with him that he liked, the Homicide part. They basically did them as these two-part crossovers and would always start on Law and Order and then finish on Homicide. And he said that the Homicide parts were always better than the Law and Order. And I pretty much agree, which is why I didn't watch Law and Order really that much, because even though it lasted quite a bit longer than Homicide and had the spinoffs and everything else, it's a lot more of a formulaic show.
Right.
Homicide was not afraid to deviate a lot more from what people might have expected of it, whereas Law and Order was a kind of like dragnet for the new generation in terms of it followed a very simple formula that repeated over and over again.
Yeah, so Terry Nation was very clever too. He made sure he had all the rights. And so the format and characters of Blake 7, copyright Terry Nation, 1975. So that wasn't a rip-off of Star Wars.
But I'll tell you what is. If you've ever seen the movie Stargate, they rip off like practically every sci-fi movie ever made before that. Did you ever see Stargate?
I watched it at the cinema, and actually, when he goes through to sort of like the gate sequence, so that was actually quite effective in the cinema. And then he goes through it, and then he says, "What a rush!" I remember that bit.
It was very cool looking, but I remember laughing at the time at just recognizing how many bits of other stuff they ripped off in that movie. Went beyond an homage to. It was just like straight up plots from previous sci-fi stuff.
We see that, but the young'uns, the really young people, they don't know how much stuff's been ripped off.
Well, yeah.
They've not got the frame of reference.
But yeah, it was. And of course, I probably hadn't seen as much sci-fi as some of the people watching that movie had, because there's the real hardcore people that are like, I got to see or read every sci-fi thing. Like that's got to have been even more that way for those people.
Oh yeah, especially in those days, because there wasn't that much science fiction on television, and so there would have been those people who were consuming almost everything.
But yeah, I mean, I was just sitting there being like, okay, that's from Star Wars, that's from Star Trek, that's from Doctor Who. Yes, they did rip off Doctor Who. Like, I'm just saying that was from Quantum Leap. That was just like.
It's like anyone now. A suggestion to writers: do not rip off Seinfeld. Any kind of line, because people just know straight away. Oh, Seinfeld line.
Well, the funny thing, you say that, but the thing is so many shows since Seinfeld, so many sitcoms have tried to emulate the formula of Seinfeld. They've tried to make new versions of it with different titles that, the style is so much reminiscent of it. You can tell they're trying to find that same formula.
But the thing is that they completely misunderstood when they said a sitcom about nothing. No, it's like 4 plots going on.
Right.
In Seinfeld.
What they meant by nothing is that, basically television always was like, you have to kind of follow from this template of plots, and they didn't do that. Because it was one of the first shows to be based on a stand-up comedian's act, that they basically took Jerry's act, which was to do observational comedy about everyday stuff, and they said, we're just going to have those things play out in a sitcom plot.
But I think from about season 4 onwards in Seinfeld, you would have a thing where quite frequently you have like all the characters would have all their own story, and each of the stories would be 3 scenes.
Right. They would
be like 5 minutes worth of each story, and there was actually a lot crammed in.
More intricate in the plots and interweaving things together, and sometimes they even pulled it off.
Yes, and the plots would come together. So I thought, people saying the sitcom about nothing. No, I mean, there'd be like early days, like Chinese restaurant, but there was usually towards. And Larry David always good at plotting.
One of my favorite episodes, the Chinese restaurant one. It's hilarious.
Right, and then there's a weird one called the Red Dot. I mean, as if they can't just cut the red dot out of the jumper. I mean, what's going on there? How do you not get a red dot out of a jumper?
I don't know. I don't remember that one, but Anyway, it's
Yep.
Thanks for joining us, everybody, for this longer than expected video.
We're going to end now, folks. But anybody who enjoys this probably knows all the other stuff we're talking about, apart from Blake 7. But oh yes, just another way to big up Blake 7. J. Michael Straczynski, huge fan of Blake 7. So much so that he actually lies about how well known it is in the United States. So, for instance, this is the Babylon 5 scriptwriting book, and he actually says at one point, he actually says on page 55, and he basically, it's a bit of a lie, where he says, because he loves Blake 7 so much, he says something here. And the publication of books with scripts from well-known British TV series such as Fawlty Towers, Monty Python's Flying Circus, or Blake 7. So he's pretty much saying that Blake 7 is as well known as those two in the United States. And that's not true.
I would say probably not Monty Python, but it might be as well known as Fawlty Towers. I mean,
it's not.
They were both, mostly shown in America on PBS, so it's like for the people that watched PBS, they probably would know them about the same.
What it is with J. Michael Straczynski, he's a huge fan of Blake 7, and he crowbars it into any conversation. He will crowbar it in if he's talking about just science fiction in general.
I don't know who that is. So.
What, J. Michaels? He created Babylon 5 and he's written a load of movies since about 2007.
I saw a little bit of Babylon 5 and I wasn't impressed with it, so I didn't watch it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that was much better later on when you can see the whole arc of the stories. So, bye-bye, folks. And I'll let Jeff say bye-bye as well, if he wants to.
Bye. Join us for the next, for episode 3 of Homicide in the near future.
Of course. Bye-bye, folks.